Welcome to Concerning the Spiritual and Art, a podcast exploring spirituality, consciousness, and the creative process. I'm your host, Martin Benson. All right, y'all, welcome back to the podcast. Today I have such a powerful episode for you with visual artist Fuchsia. She's based in London and does these incredibly beautiful paintings that are kind of like celestial and etheric, but yet also earthbound, exploring the relationship between angels and demons and sort of heaven and hell and good and bad, right and wrong. This sort of dualistic frameworks are being explored visually through her own sort of use of symbolism and landscape. She has an incredible color palette that she's using that really kind of elevates these ideas as well. And we had a really beautiful conversation today, not only about her really interesting upbringing, being brought up in Hong Kong, and then also living in India, and then in England, and how those influences really kind of seeped into a lot of the imagery she's doing as an artist. But we also talked a lot about spirituality and spiritual practice. We talked a lot about the environment. A lot of her work is sort of expressing various levels of anxiety related to the sort of ecological crises that we're grappling with today. She talks about this idea of like cultivating an ecological consciousness and sort of what that means. And so our conversation just really dove super deep into sort of like the source of like all the issues that we seem to be dealing with on this planet. Not to say we solved any of them, but we just had a really amazing, authentic exchange with one another about these ideas that we both really care about. So I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation and be super inspired by it, just like I was. So here you go. Here's Fuchsia. Hey, y'all, I'm going to cut in here real quick for all my YouTube viewers out there, just to remind you that the podcast also exists on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and any major podcast platform. So if you're enjoying what you're seeing here on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe on one of those platforms as well, so you can take the show with you on the go and never really miss an episode. Also, I wanted to let you know that I'm now offering subscriptions on my Instagram page at Martin L. Benson for 99 cents a month. That's less than $12 a year, which that funding will go toward helping produce the show. So I can continue to evolve the podcast, continue to create great content. So if you support what I'm doing here and are enjoying all this content here on YouTube, consider not only subscribing on the podcast platforms, but also subscribing on Instagram for that 99 cents a month so that I can continue on this path. So thank you all. Now back to the show. Peace. All right, Fuchsia, welcome to the podcast. How's it going over there in London today?
Very well. It's raining as usual, and we are loving it. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm super excited to connect with you. I can't even remember where I originally came across your work, but I knew that when I saw it, I was just really blown away and drawn in, not only to like a lot of the aesthetic choices, but a lot of the imagery and symbolism that goes into what you're doing. There's a really unique, fresh, sort of inspired energy that comes from the work that you create. And so I'm really excited to kind of dive in and learn more about you, learn more about your process and the work you do. But one thing was that there wasn't much information about your background, sort of like where you came from, like how you got to making this really refined, powerful work that you're currently making. So I thought that would be kind of a good way for us to begin our dialogue today. Is just learn a little bit more about you and the journey you've been on.
Thank you so much. I don't really deserve any of these compliments because I'm very much in the process of understanding like my art and what I want to say like through a visual language. So I don't think the end has ever been reached, and it will probably never be reached because it's always an ongoing thing. I'm sure you can relate as
Oh
an
yeah,
artist.
definitely. Yeah,
But
definitely.
yeah, I think I'll just give you a little brief idea about who the heck I am. Um Basically, I grew up in Hong Kong for 12 years. So I had that kind of expat life. Then I lived in India for 2 years, 10 years in the UK, 2 years in France. So I've kind of been a little bit all over, and I've had the privilege to have this kind of very rich upbringing thanks to my father's job. And I think that in terms of art, like this is really the first time that I feel like my background really has influenced my work in a way that I never noticed before, you know, in terms of symbolism. Like I use the pearl a lot, which kind of is reminiscent of going to the jade market with my mom when I was a kid and seeing loads of beautiful black pearls in Hong Kong. And then, you know, very strong Chinese symbols of the dragon, and even like beautiful like Chinese posters. These things I never consciously really put into my work, but have kind of come out naturally through experience. And I think that's really the beautiful thing about art, is that we all have such unique like tastes and experiences, and then they just come out through our practice, like through some kind of subconscious way, and you never really understand why. And then when you think about what you did, why you did what you did, it kind of makes sense. Looking at your background.
No, that's so interesting.
yeah.
I feel like, yeah, retroactively, you know, you can see why certain things might have come up within the work you're making. But while making them, there sometimes is this point of like mystery or not fully understanding what's coming through or why, but there's a resonance as to like, yes, there's this feeling of, yes, this is something of value that's interesting, that works. I'm not sure yet. But then like down the road, you're like, oh, wow, it all like clicks. I have that feeling all the time when I look back at like older work. I like understand it in a whole different way than I did when I actually made it. And I think that's a fascinating process of like how whatever that is in our inner life, in our inner state, the unconscious or like a deep level of consciousness that's kind of undergirding like everything else in our life, but some sort of wisdom or intelligence or sense of knowing is always trying to find ways to like poke itself through into our actions in this world. And I think art is any form of art is such a specific way in which that can happen, you know, very directly. But I also feel like our journey as people is to allow that energy to come through more and more organically and more consciously as we grow. But it is a fascinating thing about art itself. And so your upbringing is really interesting, you know, growing up in these different cultures and how you're piecing it all together. Was there some aspect about like not only like the visual aspect of your surroundings, you know, you're picking up on things in the market, the posters, but even like philosophically or spiritually, some sort of like cultural insight that really stuck with you through your journey in your life?
So I think that my creative journey, be it musical journey or painting journey, I guess, they have both been quite spiritual ones, which is why I don't really know how I could make art that doesn't talk about that, because I've just grown so much through those creative journeys. And for me, that kind of growth is so attached to spirituality or understanding, you know, my purpose as a human being, which we all have, obviously. But in terms of my spiritual background, I think I've always grown up in a Catholic household, so we would go to mass every Sunday with my parents, and I'm confirmed. I've been baptized, and I still go to mass every Sunday. But let's just say that I am trying to understand like what I really believe in. I believe in things like, you know, light and God and those kinds of basic concepts that I feel like really unite all of us human beings together. But I don't know if I know much about Christianity to say like that I'm like a diehard Christian. I'm still very much on a journey to kind of understand, maybe through my life, but also through my art, like what I believe in and why I believe in that and what really resonates, without falling into the trap of like this is the truth and you have to believe the truth because I say so, you know?
Yeah,
Like I
yeah, the
really,
dogmatic side.
yeah. But I'm
Hmm.
very like Buddhism as well. Like I don't know much about it, but I'm very drawn to the concepts of like, the lotus flower, which I've featured a couple of times in my work, just because I think it's such a beautiful image of
Hmm.
something, a beautiful flower emerging from like muddy waters, and
Yeah.
those things I connect with because maybe of the poetry behind it and the
Hmm.
imagery, and so I'm very much on a journey. Like I haven't sorted
Yeah.
it out or
That's
it at all.
amazing. I mean, me too. I'm on a journey too, and I feel like that's what I'm doing as well. And I feel like the more I've been on this journey, the more I'm recognizing the truth and the diversity of religious practice and approach. I'm starting to see beneath the surface of cultural expressions of religiosity into like the essence of like what's really behind all of that, and I think that to me is what makes this planet so abundantly beautiful, is the diversity of approaches, of imagery, of cultural sort of symbols that are sort of their own unique ways of speaking to this ineffable space of the spirit that we can't fully grasp in our hands, and I think that is something I think anybody, I mean, I've never personally met anybody who knows, you know what I mean? Like knows in the deepest way. Like I know everyone is kind of seeking and searching and looking for the most natural way for them to live in their deepest expression of their connection to the spiritual dimension of life. And
Mhm.
your work is really fascinating because I see a lot of explorations in duality. And I think this dualistic framework that we are sort of almost trapped in on this planet. Like you can't escape dualism if you're an embodied being on this planet. That is just part of the structure of how reality is presented to us. You can't have one thing without its full opposite. So but within that, there's an inherent unity between those opposing elements. But I look at your work and I see like even things you've written about it as an exploration in a visual sense of duality in some ways, of thinking about good versus evil, right versus wrong, light versus dark. And I think that exploration in itself is a really deep and fascinating one to go into because I think it can reveal to us a lot of the secrets that we're seeking in some way. I'm curious for you, like you thinking about duality within the imagery of your work, like what was it about those sort of binary system that really spoke to you as a way to explore through painting?
Um, I think first and foremost, if I have to think about where that interest came from, it probably would have been through my Christian upbringing,
Mm-hmm.
because there is a big emphasis on good and evil
Mm-hmm.
and the devil and God and the
Yeah.
angels. This kind of fascination about one human being choosing, like why would one human being choose right versus wrong, or the
Mm-hmm.
light versus the darkness, and this kind of like idea of a choice that can literally just change everything and shift your life like so dramatically is something that was very fascinating to me. And then when I looked into it a little bit more, because I did this show in Paris last year called, what was it?
I
It was, what was it?
have
Good.
one that's Post
Um,
Paradise, which I love that title for
Angels
the
and
most
Demons.
recent show. Oh, Angels and Demons.
Yeah, I was like, what? Versus Evil? That's wasn't the title of the show.
Yeah, I know
Yeah, it was.
exactly what you're saying. Even sometimes I forget like my own titles to my paintings because I usually like put them on there like very spontaneously. I try not to overthink it a lot. Sometimes I do, but and then sometimes when we're like, oh, what's the name of that painting? I'm like, fuck, I don't know. So I'm
I
just
mean,
able to
I
really,
remember everything, right?
yeah,
But
exactly.
we remember kind of what we were trying to say at that time,
Definitely,
I
yeah.
think.
Oh yeah.
So Angels and Demons, that was like really an interest in these two very powerful symbols, the symbol of the angel, which
Mm-hmm.
is just gives such like an aura, like has such a vibe. And the devil, which is also like such a dark energy, and like having those two symbols that have been depicted time and time again through history, like as a kind of like in a match, being like, is it the angel or the demon? Like,
Yeah,
what
like on your shoulder, you're like, oh.
exactly. And you know what, like even in films, you'll always very often have like an angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder, and it's like there's human being in the middle. And anyways, yeah, I just thought that was like a fascinating concept, and that it was also reflected very much in other religions and other forms of spirituality. So yeah, kind of understanding that more than just like Christianity, it is something that like a lot of different cultures and different religions agree on. It's that suffering and evil is a part of the world, and there is also light. And yeah,
definitely. Yeah, it's encoded in our reality. It's something we have to deal with. And I think it's so relatable, because I think, we can go to the extremes of good and evil, but where it gets really interesting for me is when you get into that gray area where one is over the other. You know what I mean? These boundaries. I think every individual has maybe their own line, and a lot of them may be similar, but a line to where you cross from one to the other. But it's like, as you approach that line, it's very interesting for me, because I think on a daily basis, we're grappling with these multiple choices of right and wrong. And we're having this inner dialogue around like, what's the best choice in this certain scenario, even if the stakes are very low. You know what I mean? So it's really an illustration of this internal experience within our consciousness. And I think that it's just part of the human species to have this dualistic framework that's everywhere we look. But I think of it also in relation to the psyche. Like we think about like the ego versus like the spirit soul, or like consciousness, like the pure, refined, unadulterated like consciousness that's within us. And then the ego, the identification with all the external attributes of our life, right? And this sense of ownership, this sense over me, over them, this sense of separation, which I think we need in a way to navigate this world. But as we can look around the planet right now, the collective ego of this planet has lost its freaking mind. We've totally lost track of what the hell we're doing. We've lost track of who we actually are. You know what I mean? And so I think art, for me at least, and this is my idealist mindset, art can be a transformative experience or act that could, for even just a momentary glimpse, you could see the inherent unity once again, and almost like wake you up to like remembering what it is we're actually doing here, and who it is you deeply are underneath the surface of who you've been told you were by the reality you live in. And so it's a really fascinating landscape to navigate, not only as just a human being doing anything, but especially in art. And I think some artists, approach it head on, whereas others might, it comes through unconsciously, but they're not really thinking about that in direct terms. But your work seems to really be focusing on this question head on. And I think the symbols of the angels and the little cherubs are really fascinating to me. Like, because we can see these different depictions of angels, but we look at like Renaissance painting, like we see those cherubs are very ubiquitous, and a lot of those is representative of like the angelic realms, and so to speak. But they're also like, if you think about, even in Catholicism, like the different angels or archangels that are a part of that tradition as well, which is, and the saints and so forth, very fascinating. But I'm curious, like the cherub seems to be a very important image for you. And I'm curious, out of all the depictions of angels, why the cherub? When we look at your paintings, we see a lot of them and they're beautiful. And I love how the lightness it brings to such a deep topic,
Thank you. So the reason, I mean, there are a few reasons. One of them is, I'm not gonna lie, an aesthetic reason. I think the cherub is super cute. And I'd much rather have a little baby angel with wings than a tall, like grown up woman as an angel. I'm sorry, this is my personal preference, and I have to. But secondly, because the reason why I put angels in my paintings is because I think that we are all born as angels. We are not, we're all born kind of like a blank slate. We're not tainted yet by the kind of evil in the world and experiences of the world. And so painting angels is supposed to be a bit of a reminder for the viewer that you actually have that innocent, loving, caring, unconditionally loving being inside of you, because that's how you were born. You're a little crying baby needing your mom, otherwise you'll die, and you're so dependent on your mother and your parents' help, and you're so pure. And I feel like as we grow up as adults, a lot of us lose that, and so there's little reminders of hope and love. But going back to what you said about the gray area, I actually also paint angels that are in the gray area, that are not just light, and they're not just, loving and everything. Some of them have been tainted with like the darkness, in a sense. And I think that's also something that maybe adds a bit of depth into the paintings, or a bit of reality, because I just feel like I don't want to just paint like super like positive and like utopic paintings, but I also want to paint paintings that reflect on what I'm going through, my kind of anxiety with regards to the world and the climate in particular, and how some people, are nice and kind and loving, and then they make the wrong decisions, and then they are unfortunately tainted by those things. So there's this also kind of duality inside the paintings that I really want, which is to represent light, but also to represent this kind of discomfort, or like darkness in a way.
Yeah, I can totally see that too. Like this sort of like this dichotomy between like this sort of etheric, angelic energy with this sort of earthly, gray, kind of muddled energy that's related to, the fact that of duality here on this planet, the earthly plane, in your color palettes. Like I look at your color palettes, the way that you have this sort of luminous, sort of reflective light on a lot of like these sort of objects or forms within it, but they also have this like kind of earthly tone to them in certain ways, which I find to be like a really interesting tension in your work that makes them really attractive and interesting to me, because I can see that sort of battleground almost between these ideas within the painting itself, just through your color palettes. You don't go super dark in a lot of them, but just even the earthly sort of tones that you bring in resonance with these like sort of like gleaming, reflective, luminous sort of spaces within the compositions that you create, really, I think, helps kind of build this gray area, this sort of intermixing of the sort of extremes of duality, and creates this kind of field of you're not be able to fully discern it, which I think is what makes it interesting and makes you want to look and dive into it and discover sort of what's going on there. And then there's another component with the flowers that you use in your work. You mentioned the pearl, but also I was wondering if we could talk about like the flower and like what that is sort of symbolic of for you. And a lot of the paintings you create, there's definitely some of that sort of flora happening within it.
So going back to the lotus flower, for instance, it is this kind of fascination about something coming from the mud or the ground or the earth, being absolutely nothing, and then blooming, if it's in the right conditions, into something really beautiful. I don't know, I just feel like that concept has really inspired me, and also inspired my name, like as an artist, fuchsia, the fuchsia flower,
Mm-hmm.
which also is, for the color, like fuchsia is a very strong but a very female kind of um,
Mm-hmm.
girly type of color, but it's also got that like boldness and that strength to it.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
I do think that about flowers as well. It's not because they're just very delicate and beautiful that they don't have this kind of power to them as
Oh
well.
yeah, no, most definitely. And I think what you're pointing to, like in terms of like, I think of like this term, like no mud, no lotus.
Yeah.
So it's like it almost points to the fact that like the dualistic components of our reality are actually working together in some way. Like you can't have the beauty of the flower without the muck of the
Mm.
mud, and that nourishes the flower. It's like it completes the circle in a way. And I think sometimes we can get so attached to duality as an end all be all, as like the ultimate form, but we have to realize that they're working together, the yin and the yang, you know what I mean? Or like how I like to think of it as like two sides of a coin. You have the heads or the tails, but it's one coin, it's one process happening. And it's almost like the darkness is there to elevate the light, and the light is there in order to give the darkness a purpose. So it has something to do, right? And so there's and it's because of that interaction of those two things that we have life itself that we can experience, because otherwise it's non-dual. There is no separation. And in a non-dual state, there is no such thing as you or me or this room or this planet. It's all one. It's so all one that there's nothing to compare it to or relate it to, which I think is an incredibly valuable experience to taste what that's like to be fully one with your entire reality, which you can do through spiritual practice, through psychedelic medicines, or spontaneously in other experiences like gardening or doing a walk in nature or making art. All of a sudden, it could be just like a flash of awareness of your interdependent nature with all of life. And so I think that's a beautiful thing. But at the end of the day, like we have to live these individual lives and we have to live in the world of duality. So it's kind of an interesting paradox that we are confronted with here. That I think about this all the time in my life. Like especially when I go through really dark, difficult times, I always try to ask myself the question, like, what is this nourishing in my life? Like, what is this feeding? Like, what good is coming from this that I can't see yet? And that kind of helps me maintain some level of stability in my mind amidst the perceived chaos of what seems to be going on, especially in these times that we live in. I mean, you touched on your anxiety around the climate. I mean, this is something that I think everybody is feeling on some level. Whether they suppress it or not is one thing, but I think it's still apparent. It's still a part of our existence right now. Could you maybe talk a little more about like your thoughts on that and like your experience grappling with your own sort of anxiety around this sort of existential place that we're in on this planet, this real almost like feels like a choice point. We're like coming to the head of something and we have to make a collective decision to go one way or another. Feels that way. I don't know if that's ultimately how it's going to be.
No. I mean, it feels that way, but also it's just so demoralizing because you realize that so many people actually care about this and want to make a change, and really want to make the right decision so that we'll be going on the right path in the next like tens of years or so.
Yeah.
Um, but they are just so powerless towards this. But I myself, as an artist, I mean, I always try to make shows about that, just because my point here as an artist is to be a kind of an artivist. I
Mm-hmm.
use the tool and the medium of art and visual language in order to um, really talk about and encourage discussions about a subject that I think about 24/7, which is
Mm-hmm.
environment and climate change, and how I can make a difference. I probably can't make as much of a difference as the head of like BP or Equinor, but I can make a difference in
Yeah.
my own little way. And
Yeah.
think that that's what it kind of comes down to. It's, if you care about something, don't tell yourself that just because you have, you know, a certain job or something, that you can't actually be involved in that cause. And for
Yeah.
me, that's really about like the planet. But today I actually went to a protest, which I don't usually go to, but it was really that almost like not an experience, so to say, but it was an opportunity for me to really be involved and look at what people outside of the art world are actually doing, and kind of tying, you know, in my own practice, doing my shows, you know, I'm in the art world, like doing my thing, like trying to talk about climate, but also understanding that this climate, like climate change and finding climate solutions, is a much bigger issue than just something that can be discussed in the art world. And so trying to find a link between talking about it within my industry and also being involved into a really bigger kinds of, you know, the industries, and talking to scientists and everything about this and how we can actually make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is a very important thing to ask questions about, like how, and also to just have a contemplative experience of, like, if you really like sit and you really think about the impact that we can make as individuals relative to the perceived grand scale of this issue, it can sometimes feel a little defeating. But I also remember that this whole place is a place of paradox, and things always make exactly the kind of sense you hope they do, or in the way that you think they should. And I feel like on some level, by just taking ownership over your own consciousness, over your own actions, over your own environment, your own community, and trying to, in those moments, you talked about like those moments like the devil, and God or whatever on your shoulder, but in those moments where you can remember to ask yourself what kind of choices am I making that are going to lead toward this place that I know we can get to, or is it going to lead us away from it? And we can make those little choices many times a day, many days a year, and many years on top of years. Who knows what kind of impact that could actually have? Like, I feel like we're so interconnected as a human species. We've lost touch with it. We've lost our actual visceral awareness of our interdependence with each other. But I think once people start waking up to it, their actions change. And I think it becomes like this chain reaction, some like spiritual chain reaction, where it's like, it just one turns to two turns, you know what I mean? It's almost like Fibonacci sequence or an exponential equation, where it just exponentially all of a sudden, boom, everyone is like on that wavelength now, and everyone's making better choices. And then all of a sudden, boom, like we're in a totally different environment. But that's, again, maybe an idealistic version of what's going on. But I just think we can't forget that us as individuals do have an impact. We do play an important role. Every choice we make can make a difference. We just might not be able to see how, when, or why. But I think deep down, if we just remember that it does, then I think, and we all take responsibility, I think, for our own lives, then perhaps something magical can take place. Something alchemical can take place here that we could never even fathom in this moment that we're speaking right now. Because I personally believe that all the solutions to our problems exist currently on planet Earth. It's just a matter of what are we giving voice to, and what are we giving money to, and what are we, emphasizing in our culture. And so that gives me great hope in some ways when I think of it in those terms.
It's like directing that energy and that power that we have into the right places, once again, going back to the good and evil, you have one choice. Are you going to make the right one or the wrong one? But that's why my whole work talks about ecological consciousness. It's because I really saw and I felt the link between caring about the planet, caring about, our home and nature, with connecting with your spirit and your spiritual self. If only the people in power actually had more of an awareness of their spiritual selves and the impacts that their decisions were going to have on other people, I'm sure that we would be in a very different place in terms of, the future of our planet.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I
yeah,
feel
I completely agree with you. Like,
yeah, I feel the same way. But I also feel like the people who are in positions of power right now are cut from a different cloth, and they've been in this place for so long that they've deluded themselves to thinking that they actually care. Because when you really get down to it, I would say, again, I don't have statistics, I'm just kind of riffing, but the majority of people who are in positions of great power on this planet um, probably have lost touch with that ecological consciousness in a way they're not even aware of. Like they're self-deceiving. And I think that's the trick the ego plays on us. Or if you want to say the devil, right? Or the darkness, it plays this trick on us by hiding itself in the things that we think it's not. You know what I mean? It's like, and that's a really tricky place too, in terms of humanity. It's like we can deceive ourselves, especially when you've been in these positions of power and prestige. The ego gets very inflated and very diluted. And so I don't think the solutions are going to come from the current people in positions of power. I think they're going to come from whatever this next generation is that's going to be coming up, because I think we're going to see a real changing of the guard in some ways. You just think about it from the practicalities of human life. Like a lot of people who hold positions of power are much older, and entering a different stage in their life. And so we're going to see a domino effect of them falling out. And the question is, who's coming up? And we have to be willing to identify those leaders, and help elevate them, and support them. But it's tricky because any sort of powerful institution is going to attract people who want to make change for the right reasons, who are their consciousness is aligned, they're really like in it. And it's also going to attract the people who just want power, who just want to control. And I think if there's any mark of the ego, it is the control mark, the one that is like the need to control everything. That is sort of the thumbprint of the ego. And so we definitely have to be aware of who's coming up and be much more united in who we allow to hold these positions of power. And sometimes personally, to be honest with you, Fuchsia, like I feel that's sometimes where I feel the most helpless, is in that regard, because I feel like sometimes we're just given two bad choices and the good choices never make it to the point where they can actually get somewhere. Do you feel that way in London, or do you feel that way like in your sort of world that you live in when you engage politically?
what, that the good choices are always the hardest, or
That sometimes there are no good choices. There's just two kind of bad ones, you know?
yeah,
You know what
yeah.
I'm saying?
Well, that's where it comes down to, again, like people in power, and how their decisions are affecting the decisions that we on the bottom are allowed to make. I mean, I say that, quote unquote, because we're not, leaders of states and stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I know what you mean.
I'm saying that in a in a very kind way. Um, but yeah, unfortunately, I do feel like the more the higher somebody goes, in terms of, just politically, or in terms of in a business or something, the more they're probably tainted and having to make difficult decisions. And a lot of the time those difficult decisions come at the detriment of like the planet or the environment or communities that are going to be affected, in order to kind of, raise their profit, and all
Yeah.
of those things, which seem to be celebrated so much in this society. And that's literally the only kind of metric to success. It's how much, money you make and all of that. And that's where the real problem lies. And I just wish that their kind of whole environment could switch, could change a little bit, so that they would understand that that's human happiness and health, the environment, and
Yeah.
air pollution, all of those things, very important to a lot of people, and they have the power to actually change that. And that is so
Yeah.
much more enriching than just making more and more and more and more and more money.
Yeah.
Like,
But again, you have to shift their awareness of that fact. Like, again, they are a lot of people who are making those decisions that are really detrimental to most people on this planet, to the environment, are in this box, probably in their mind, and they're not able to see the greater impact that they're making, and also the potential of them to make an even bigger impact in a positive way. They just are, they're blinded by, a lot of times, power, prestige, and sort of influence, and sort of the control mechanisms of their own ego and their own desire structures. And so the question is, like, how do we blow those doors open? And I think art is one way that you can blow people's doors open. It's just not going to happen on a grand scale through one work of art. It's going to happen through a movement of all kinds of artists of all mediums, from the movies we watch, the books we read, the stories we tell, the art we look at and engage with, the music we listen to, the poetry, like the comedy, you know what I mean? Like all of this, it's going to be a movement within that I think can have a more collective impact in these spaces. But it's tough, I feel like our birthright deep down is to be like stewards and protectors of this beautiful planet. Like that's is like kind of the role that humanity could play. Like we could be literally like the protectors of this incredible ecological paradise if we wanted to. And I think we have all the skills, all the means to do that. And I feel a lot of faith when I look at younger generations. I'm a father of 2 young children. And so I think about like their life and the world that they're inheriting, and it's going to be a tough road, but I think sometimes that tough road is going to create a greater awakening in them. So when they get in positions where they can make better choices, they're going to have a better impact in some ways. I feel like we've had it made for a long time, and like now it's all kind of coming to a head in the Western world, you know what I mean? In the sort of industrialized Western world. But now we're seeing like all the repercussions of all the bad choices we've made over the years. And we have to start making better choices more quickly. And I think one way of doing that, I think, is spiritual practice, getting in touch with who you are in the deepest, most fundamental level. But I also see like a lot more people engaging in plant medicine, whether it's through psychedelics like psilocybin or ayahuasca or LSD or MDMA or whatever. You're seeing more and more people getting their consciousness open to this interdependent, fundamental nature of our life. And I know for me personally, that's been hugely impactful for my own development. I was curious, is that something you've ever explored or thought of exploring for your own self? Those kinds of compounds or those kinds of experiences?
I'm more, I mean, I completely happy to know that people explore those things, and especially if it has a positive impact on them and it makes them, connect with others better, or see more light and open up their minds, really. But personally, I feel like even just the practice of being in stillness is a very powerful one. Even when I'm in the studio, sometimes usually I'm like you, I listen to lots of podcasts and I love to learn about spirituality, but we see the environment and also the brain, neuroscience. I'm really into that stuff. But sometimes I have this kind of self-induced practice of turning everything off and just trying to be as mindful as possible in the moment, focusing on what I'm painting, why I'm doing this again. And that's just another way to remind yourself that there is something else in this world that is not in the whole pace of this go 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 go, and you have to do that, and how are you going to sell this, and how are you going to sell that? It's just a point where you can escape, and I think you can do that through psychedelics. I did a huge painting on it, actually, which was featured in my show in China a couple of
Awesome.
months ago. It was about like the blue lotus, Egyptian
Mm-hmm.
blue lotus, which was very much used for psychedelic purposes. And I think that all of those things, you know, you said are valid. You know, some people want to explore it through psychedelics, and others want to just do it through meditation or being
Mm-hmm.
mindful. And for me, I'm more focused on trying to be as present in this real world as I can. That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, no, I totally relate. I mean, that's exactly how I approach my own studio practice. Like when I'm painting, like I don't listen to music, I don't listen to podcasts, I don't do anything. I just paint and I try to be as present and mindful as I possibly can be, just like what you're saying. And to me, that's what makes the act of painting so powerful and so transformative. And my hope is that by being in that sort of consciousness when I'm making work, that the work itself will, in some quantum level, on some energetic level, will hold that energy signature, that resonance of that consciousness, and transmit it out to those who see it so they can feel that kind of energy in them. I think that's so important. Meditation has been a huge part of my path as a human being, and it's transformed my whole life for a long time. And it's something I deeply engage in, not only formal practice, but the most important thing is taking the formal practice, the sitting, and bringing it into everything you do. And that's really the hardest part. But I think that's the most important part is the cultivation of that consciousness of ultimate awareness to come through in everything that you do. And I think when you're in that state of mind, you can see things with such clarity and beauty, and you can recognize the light all around you all the time. It's so easy to get caught up in thinking everything is dark and negative and everything's going south, everything's bad. But if you really pay attention to what's happening around you, you can see immense beauty, immense magic taking place. And I find that mindfulness and deep presence, meditative process has allowed me to recognize what's here all along. So I'm totally in alignment with you there. The psychedelic thing is really related to all that. But it also, I think, can, for some people, it can just blow the doors wide open and sort of, I guess, shatter all the delusions that they have built around their lives and open them to this greater expanse of their spirit in relation to the entire universe. And I think a lot of people who approach those compounds with sacredness, with care, with thoughtfulness, with safety in mind, can have such incredible experiences that then lead them to want to meditate, lead them to want to, do mindfulness and do other kinds of spiritual practice. And some people, they don't need those psychedelic openings to want to do that, to be drawn to those spaces. There's not one perfect way or one right or wrong way to enter those kinds of spaces. But I find them to be helpful tools, especially for certain people who've had certain kind of life experiences or certain places in their lives. They're ultimately that, though. It's a tool. It's not the answer. It's just going to be a tool that can help you be more connected to your journey, to uncovering the answers that you're actually seeking on a deep level. And so I see a lot of artists who are exploring that, a lot of artists who are exploring it in the same way that you and I are as well, through our studio practice. Do you have any kind of like rituals or ways in which you like enter your studio space, or like ways in which you like, approach the actual space you're making art in? Is that a big part of your process, is like developing rituals of any kind?
It isn't so much at the moment, just because like, as I said, I'm trying to grow, like, in my spiritual practice, what yeah, as a human, and trying to like sort out a lot of different things in my life. But recently, I was given incense.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never been much of a incense lady girl, but I've actually been burning it every day at the
Oh,
studio, maybe like towards the end of the day. I've always been a candle girl, so I've
Hmm.
always had candles everywhere, but incense I never did. And for some weird, and probably like there's an explanation for this, but yeah, for some reason I've just felt so that it's brought such a different dimension to my experience in the studio.
Mm.
And I really would love to try to, as you were saying, cultivate. That word cultivate is such a beautiful one, going back to
Hmm.
the flowers and everything. It's something that you nurture. And I really want to try to cultivate this spiritual practice almost in the studio.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's
What kind
it's
of
something.
incense is it? Do you know the smell or what the
I don't remember
Mhm.
it. It's
Yeah,
a very typical like Indian one. It was like in a yellow packaging or something.
maybe like a
Oh,
sandalwood or Nag
something.
Champa is like one that you see a lot of.
It's
Um,
one that reminded me of India a lot.
yeah, yeah. Could be sandalwood. I love sandalwood. I mean, anything sandalwood, I'm like all over it. Or lavender too. I love lavender.
Mm,
But I love like aromas and things like that. I light a lot of incense too. Because I think it does kind of like color the space in a different way. Like you're setting a vibration, a tonal quality within the environment that I think does shift the consciousness of the person in there. Like just the smell affects your consciousness in the same way that something you see does or something you hear does, like these sense doors, these doorways into our inner being and our inner life are really important. I think that's what we do as artists is we engage the various sensory systems of human beings in order to penetrate into the depth of their spirit or their soul or connect with them on a deep fundamental level. So I think that's beautiful that you're like discovering your own sort of rituals and ways of cultivating sacred space within the studio. And I think as you continue to just think about that, it's going to evolve and you might just naturally come up with your own sort of way of ritualizing your practice that will, continue to grow and change your whole life.
mm,
I just find that for me, and not all artists, some artists can just dive right in. They just get in the studio, get to work. Like for me, I have to like slow down and I have to like, and I go through like certain rituals with my materials or the way I set my space up in order to like almost like coax me into a deeper state of mind so that I can be more and more present with when it comes time to putting paint on the surface or drawing or whatever it is that I'm doing. And so for me personally, it's been so helpful because it's like I'm not just going from like a chaotic moment and be like, okay, it's time to be in the studio, let's get to work. I need that kind of transition. You know what I mean? Both transition in and I personally need the transition out, especially when you have long sessions of 3, 4, 5, 6 hours of painting. You get into this crazy, amazing mind state, but you also then re-entering into your life, seeing your partner or your neighbor or going to the grocery store right after. It's like, whoa, the intensity is very heightened. So I like to kind of ease myself in and then ease myself out through various rituals that I do. So I think that's beautiful that you're like aware of your own path of discovery. And I'm excited, for you to like continue to just let your curiosity and let your intuition guide you into developing something authentically your own. Because whatever it is you do that gets you into that empty, open space to where the energy of God or the energy of life or the energy of consciousness can move through you into the work you're doing, it's going to make that work even more powerful for somebody else out there. Hopefully many people, but at least one other person out there, it could transform everything for them in some way.
you're right. But I was very curious to know when you asked me that question about ritual about yours, because I'm fascinated by artists, and you've had a couple on the podcast. I listened to all of them, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
And a lot of the works that I've seen, and also your work, is just so meticulous and precise and so like thought through. And for me, I have to say I have, well, different energies in the studio. Like sometimes I'm like, oh, I just hate the world, and I just have to like slap some paint with like a palette
Yeah.
knife or something. And sometimes I'm like, okay, you know what? Like this is a part in the painting when you just have to relax, you have to breathe, and you just have to be really careful because you're doing a face or you're doing, something with where you want the texture to be smooth. So, kind of like navigating those different energies and realizing
Mhm.
that in a painting you can have that kind of strong, like
Mhm.
annoyed, angry energy, but also there's a place for the kind of calm energy. And I feel like just looking at your paintings, you've like through maybe your rituals where you pass from a chaotic kind of life to just being still in the studio, you've
Yeah.
this sense of really um uh kind of channeling that calm energy into the paintings. And I'm so fascinated by it because I feel like that's kind of um the same process that one would go through, entering a meditation session or something.
Mhm.
You can't be like here agitated, like trying to meditate. You really have to breathe and like let go.
Yeah.
That has to happen. And that's something that
Yeah.
I'm trying to work on personally, but it's beautiful to see that you've managed to do it like so well. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on it myself, and sometimes I do get in the studio and I have agitation or even like anger or frustration. And I think all of us as artists, we have our own unique way of doing things. There's no one way to approach it other than the most authentic way that is
mm,
and we have to discover that over time. We become better and better at embodying that authenticity of who we are, because I think the individual expression of all of us is what makes life so beautiful. The paradox of our individuality and our inherent unity is the mystery of life. And so you have to own who you are too, and own your feelings, and let that come through in the work in the way that makes sense for you, that's helpful for you. I feel like art is a healing process, not only for the artists themselves, but also potentially for the viewers of art. There's a healing that can happen. So, I mean, just back to what you're mentioning about yourself, like if you have that energy bubbling through you and it makes sense to, enact that within the work, do it. You know what I mean? Because it's the human experience. Like people will feel that and relate to it. And that's good. That's what you want. You want people to relate to what you're doing in the authentic way. For me, like I just, even if I have those days where I'm kind of disjointed in my mind or chaotic, I try to just first off, when I enter, like just the way I put my apron on, I try to be just like, it's almost like a threshold I'm passing through. You know what I mean? It's like when I put it around my head and over, it's like I'm washing away what it is, whatever it is I'm bringing into this space. And I'm kind of like almost cleansing or purifying myself in that way. Sometimes I'll actually pray on the paintings themselves. Like if they're dry, I will put my head on the freaking painting and I will just try to cultivate like the deep intention that I desire for the work I make, which is to nurture seeds of awakening in people in some way, shape, or form. And so I have my own sort of ritual of prayers that I do, that's important for me. But then I try to, before I even put paint on the brush and put it on the surface, just try to be in that mindfulness space. Like the way I open my tray where my oil paint is, I like just really open it. You know what I mean? I feel my feet on the ground. I really just try to like take a few minutes to just be as perfectly connected to what I'm doing while I'm doing it. And to me, that kind of sets the tone. So then when I start painting, I might still have a little bit of that agitation there, but as I continue to refocus, reconcentrate back on the intention, it slowly just dissolves. Um, and I think that is sort of the process of meditation, is to be able to redirect your consciousness, your attention back to the object of concentration or awareness, depending on, there are many types of meditation, but it's about coming back. As many times as you drift away, as many times you get caught up in your own fantasies or ruminations, you come back every time. And so for me, it's like I take that same mentality to how I work in the studio. If I notice I'm drifting into some thinking, I just come back, feel the brush against my skin, feel the vibration of it moving across the canvas. You know what I mean? Try to feel like those little minute sort of almost seemingly inconsequential, insignificant details of my experience and get back into that. And then when I'm done with paintings, like the biggest ritual is just cleaning the brushes, cleaning the materials, cleaning the space. Sometimes I'll do that before as well, a little bit, depending on, how it was left before. But when I finish a painting, when it's done, like there's sort of like a ritual I do around cleaning the palettes, cleaning the brushes, and like cleaning the slate to allow space for the next thing to come through. But it's constantly evolving for me too, sometimes I'll actually sit and do like a 5 to 10 minute meditation before I even enter the studio, just to begin that process too. It just depends on the day. But for me, that's kind of my approach, is the mindfulness, the prayer, the, aligning with my deep intention, with why I'm doing this in the first place. Because if looking at it from the outside in, I mean, you could probably agree with this, Fuchsia. Like some people might think that what we do is absolutely absurd. Like, you know what I mean? Like, like what the hell? Like you're just making images and painting. Like, what does this have to do with our survival? What does this have to do with like the practicalities of being alive? But to me, that's what makes the human species so special, is that we feel drawn to do these things. It says something about our spirit. And so I think it's a wonderful thing.
I can relate to the absurd thing. A lot of people have asked me if I took any drugs before before painting a lot of my paintings. So yeah, you got to embrace it. But your rituals of moving into your practice and exiting your practice almost seem as sacred and as beautiful as you actually doing your practice. So I found that the way that you explain that and that mental preparation seems to be almost as important to you as the act of actually painting. So it's really nice to see that, your spirituality is intrinsically linked with your art practice.
Definitely. I think that's something I was really seeking early on as an artist that I wasn't finding yet. It took me a while to find a way to integrate my spiritual longing and practice into the act of making art. I have some really close friends who I think were instrumental in helping awaken that within me. And it's invaluable to my life, because to me, these paintings that we make as artists, we have to recognize not only the power and beauty and majesty of them themselves, but also the ephemeral quality of them, the fact that they're not going to last, and that the point is not the object ultimately, because that's only going to be here for a little bit of time. Because, you zoom out 10,000 years from now, will any of these things we make be around? Probably not. So the point is not the eternalization of what we create. The point, I think, is the energy that goes into what we're making and who we are. That makes, I think, a difference on a vibrational way, in the infinite space. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not the object itself isn't the point, it's a part of the process. Because ultimately these things we make will dissolve back into the earth. And so we have to remember that too. And we can't take ourselves too seriously in terms of the work we make. We have to recognize that it's just a part of a process of our own, well, bringing the word cultivation back, our own cultivation of our own consciousness and awakening. And I think it's when we engage in that in an authentic way, people can feel it. I think we're all, bullshit detectors on a deep level. We can feel authenticity when we see it. You know what I mean? Whether we can recognize it to the point of like separating it from the other things, it gets a little tricky in this media saturated age. But I think when you feel it, you know it. And I think that's something we're all striving for in some ways, a deep authenticity in the way we live in the world. So I try to bring that into how I make work, how I do everything. I'm terrible at it. I mess up. You can ask my wife. Like, I try to be mindful as much as I can, but man, I'm bonehead sometimes. I do some dumb stuff, and so I'm just here working on myself, like I think everybody is. And I think when you become conscious of that and you engage in it consciously, you can make huge strides. Not only for your life, but for the lives of all those that you touch, the ones you pass by on the street, your friends, your family, strangers all around. Your vibration can have an impact. You just might not be aware of how deep or how far reaching it is, but I think it does.
Yeah, and on that subject, I think it's also really important to remember that the whole point of all of this, right? And why we're doing it, and what's the what is the point? Is it just to finish a painting? Is it just to sell the painting? Is it and kind of understand the metrics of that, and what makes a painting successful for a lot of people, especially people who aren't particularly in the art world, that are more like in kind of general society. They don't really understand that a lot of the time, and their only way of understanding if the work is good or not is if it's been placed in a big institution, if it's been sold, if it's been, all of these things, which are so far from what we're trying to achieve when we're in the studio, because we're trying to connect with ourselves so we can connect with other people, so that we can talk about stuff that's actually important. And it has, if it gets into a big institution, that's great, and that's something that will help get our message across to more people, but that's not the end point of this whole thing, right? Like,
exactly. Yeah, because
so
it'll all eventually be forgotten on some level in terms of the details, the nitty-gritty details of everything, but the energy behind everything, the consciousness that is making these things, that is doing these things, I think that lives on in a way we can't imagine. But the actual tangible, a byproduct of our actions through, let's say, a painting or whatever, like, or even success or notoriety, like that's not permanent either. Like, the point is not that either. Like, I think the point is to not sink your teeth in or attach yourself to things that are ultimately not going to last. I think what we're seeking is what does last. What is the fundamental ground of all of this experience, of all of this? And if we connect with that, then we're kind of transcending in some ways the duality, and we're connected to the non-duality, the inherent unity, while at the same time being embodied in a dualistic experience without any attachment to it. I think that's one of the biggest teachings in all deep mystical religious practices, but especially in like a Buddhist or even Vedic philosophical practice, is about non-attachment. And it's not about detachment or apathy. It's a space of real, like, understanding what is fundamental, what is ultimately the most important thing versus what is just temporary. You know what I mean? And so that is an interesting paradox, I think, as artists, that we have to traverse. Is this, we're making objects, people are buying and selling them, they're in these institutions, but ultimately we can't divorce ourselves from the fact that, like, those things ultimately aren't the point. Like what you said, that's not the point. The point is the connection that we make, like you said, like the connecting with another person, like reaching out and connecting to someone else, and in that moment, that flash, we are united on some fundamental level. And I think that's what we're ultimately maybe trying to do, is figure out how to come back together again after being so lost in our own separate illusions. And it's a fascinating time to be alive, as scary as it can feel, as difficult as it can be. Like, I think we live in a time of infinite possibilities. And I think we're coming to a place of great change. And anytime you come to a point of great change, there's immense possibilities for incredible positive transformation. And so my prayers that I put out into the universe every moment of my life that I can remember to do so, is to awaken the unified consciousness of this planet so that we can embody the true roles we were destined to play, which is the gardeners of this grand ecosystem, to the, as you said, that ecological consciousness pervading all things. And so I see you're doing it, you're doing it through your own process, through your own authentic discovery of, as an artist. I think the work you're making, playing with the angelic forms as kind of creating this metaphor for, like, our innermost being, is so beautiful to remind us that, but also not and I think what's also special and powerful about your work is that you're not negating the shadow side, that you're finding a way to integrate the duality. And so I'm excited to see kind of where it evolves to as you evolve as a person.
Thank you. Thanks. Well,
Yeah.
we'll see we'll see where it evolves. But I definitely want it to evolve in the way that you were talking about before, which is having change within yourself, and cultivating, mindfulness practice and meditation,
Yeah.
praying, that how that can actually affect your work, and just changing the state of your brain and your mind when you're in the studio, even when you're thinking about ideas, and just being more kind to yourself and the goals that you want to achieve,
Yeah.
really can only do wonders to your practice. And that's what I'm trying to do at this moment in time,
Yeah.
especially in terms of, being kind to yourself, because
Yes.
there's that inner critic that can cloud
Mm-hmm.
so many of our joyful moments in the studio,
So
like,
true.
oh, this painting is, 80% the way that I want it, but oh, that 20%, and what am I going to do with it? And, oh, I'm bad, and should I even be an artist? And those negative thoughts, going back to cultivation, like you were saying, are things that you can really that you will cultivate if you continue to feed that kind of state
Yes.
of mindset. And I'm trying to shift from that kind of detrimental, maybe dark mindset, to a more like loving and positive one, because that can only do good for myself, but for other people as well,
Yeah. 100%. For me, I try to like the way that I approach that, because I'm working on that myself, it's like how to not feed the self-critic and the judgmental nature that arises in mind, not only the judgmental nature toward myself, but toward everything,
Mm.
is to acknowledge it with a lot of humor, and to laugh at myself at the certain kind of thoughts that come through my mind, and just frame it and just laugh at the absurdity of it, and not try to like give it more power energy than it's asking for, but to laugh at it and see the absurdity, and then to shift my awareness back toward the truth of who I know I am, beyond all the judgments and all the, you know what I mean, all the negative thought patterns that come up. And I think for me, that's been what's really helpful, is the humor side of it, to like be aware of your thought patterns and to be able to just laugh at them, at the absurdity of them. That's been really helpful for me. It's helped me stay more grounded, because no matter how high you get or enlightened you might get, those thoughts are still going to come up and test you. Oh yeah, you think you're enlightened? Well, you know what I mean? And so the point, how can you continue to engage with this quality that can arise in your mind? And humor, I think, is always a powerful way to do it. But this has been such a great conversation, Fuchsia. I mean, your work is so beautiful, so fascinating. And I think, the vulnerability that you show and share, not only in sharing about your work, but that also comes through in it, I think is so relatable and powerful, and really can speak to so many people, because I think it kind of is reflective of how we all feel in some ways. You know what I mean? And so just thank you so much for taking the time to connect with me on the podcast. I mean, we've been going for a little over an hour now, and I feel like we can keep going, but I know you probably want to carry on with your afternoon. Hopefully the sun popped out, but I just want to thank you so much for sharing this space with me, and for sharing your art. And I'm just, I'm a huge fan over here, and I'm going to keep, paying attention and watching you evolve, and see, how we can again unite. Again, that's the point, is for us to be a united collective movement within art, where we all can do our part. So just thank you for doing yours.
Thank you so much. And I really, really love your work and podcast, and all the things that you try to do to, as you were saying, unite people who are interested in seeking that spiritual realm, or version of, the truth, through art and through visual practice. And I think that's literally the only way that we're going to be able to actually make a difference in the world is if we are open enough to connect to one another and are curious to try to understand each other's work. And so thank you so much for what you're doing.
Yeah, for
Because when I
sure.
heard that podcast first time, I was like, oh, so it's just so nice and refreshing to see
Oh,
there is someone out there that actually, is thinking about connecting other people beyond their personal spiritual practice. So
yeah.
thank you very much.
Oh, for sure. My pleasure. I mean, more to come, more connection to happen. Everybody out there, you have to follow Fuchsia on Instagram, check out our website. I'll have all the links in the show notes, so you can stay connected with all the amazing things coming out of her studio. And then we'll, of course, continue to be connected and stay in touch. And just thank you again. So we'll talk soon, okay?
All
right,
thank
peace.
you so much.
Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of Concerning the Spiritual and Art. If you like what we're doing here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can stay in touch and in tune with all the amazing offerings that we're going to be bringing to this channel. Thanks again for all your support. Super grateful, and excited to bring more content your way. Peace, y'all.